My name is Sarah. I'm 38 years old. Until recently, it seemed like I had a fairly ordinary life. My husband, Michael, 2 children, a house in the suburbs, endless to-do lists. The marriage was neither a fairy tale nor a nightmare, somewhere in between, like many people's. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we laughed, sometimes we just lived side by side, tired and silent. Jessica, my younger sister, lived in another state for a long time. We communicated mostly by phone, sometimes by video calls, sometimes through messages. She went through a difficult period, failed relationships, job changes, searching for herself. A few years ago, she said she had a child, but told me almost nothing about the father. She explained it simply, "It's a complicated story. I don't want to get into it yet." I didn't press her then. People have a right to secrets, especially when they haven't figured things out themselves. A few years later, Jessica decided to move closer. She found a place half an hour's drive from us. She said she was tired of living far from family and wanted her son to grow up not in a aunt on the phone mode, but to see his grandmother, aunt, and cousins. I was happy about this. It seemed like life was gradually getting better. She had a child, some housing, plans for the future. The first months after her move passed quite calmly. She sometimes stopped by our place, the children got to know each other, gradually got used to one another. I knew she was renting a small apartment and having trouble managing expenses, but she didn't reveal many details. She said she had side jobs that she was somehow managing. I believed her. Her life often had complications, but she usually found a way through. I started noticing changes long before the day when the truth finally came together into a complete picture. At first, these were small things. Michael started talking more often about taking extra shifts and projects to tighten the budget. We really did have expenses: children, loans, everyday life. I didn't see anything unusual in this. We discussed that we needed to cut back a bit, postpone some plans, refuse unnecessary purchases. At the same time, Jessica kept mentioning that she somehow managed with another payment, sometimes talking about side work, sometimes about some lucky situation. I didn't connect one thing with the other. Everyone has their own life, their own economy. We were close as a family, but still, everyone had their own separate piece of reality. The clue appeared from where I least expected it, from the children. My daughter, once in a conversation with a friend, which I overheard by chance, said that Dad is strangely often around when Aunt Jessica goes somewhere. Then my son mentioned he saw Dad's car near Jessica's neighborhood on a day when Michael said he had a late meeting. This still didn't look like direct evidence. It could easily be explained. He was helping my sister with errands, giving her rides, handling some issues. But with these words, for the first time, I had the feeling that I wanted to see the picture a bit clearer than before. Not because I wanted to catch someone in a lie, but because too much was left off screen. The decisive moment wasn't one fact, but their accumulation. More and more often, business trips coincided with Jessica saying she had some important matters. More and more often, Michael left exactly on days when she mentioned difficulties with documents, school, housing. I began to notice this not as suspicions, but rather as a strange repetition. One evening, when Michael was late again and wrote that he would stay the night closer to work, I caught myself thinking that I no longer wanted to calm myself with the familiar phrase, "Well, these things happen." There was no scandal, no shouting. There was just a feeling that I had been closing my eyes for too long to what didn't fit into a simple picture. The next day, when he was in the shower, I approached his phone. This was a decision I had postponed a long time. I didn't like the very idea of controlling and checking, but living in the fog became even more unpleasant. I unlocked the phone and saw not one mistaken correspondence, but a system. There were regular transfers to Jessica, amounts that were hard to call accidental, discussions about rent for her apartment, school payments for her son, some everyday details. All of this ran parallel with our family life, but wasn't reflected in it at all. I saw arrangements for meetings that were explained to me as work delays. There were no obvious declarations of love, but there was no neutral distance either. At that moment, I no longer needed to imagine anything. The connections between these fragments came together so smoothly to continue believing this was just him helping my sister as a good person. When Michael came out of the shower, I didn't make a scene. I told him that I knew enough to understand that for many years, there had been another dimension in our life that I wasn't told about. I asked him to move out temporarily, so as not to mix daily routine with what would need to be discussed further. I spoke calmly, but inside I felt how the familiar support of "we have a normal family" began to crack. The house remained the same mugs on the table, the same children's shouts from the room, the same smell of dinner. What changed wasn't the picture around me, but how I see it now.
The first days after Michael moved out were not like a storm, but like a lingering, overcast day. No sharp events, just constant internal heaviness. On the outside, life continued its course. The children needed to go to school, work had to start on time, bills didn't pay themselves. And in this paradox between external stability and internal upheaval, there was something very real about life. I began methodically rewinding the last few years, not to punish myself for inattention, but to honestly understand how everything looked then. For several years, Jessica lived in another state, and I perceived her as someone at a distance. Problems I couldn't solve, stories I didn't intrude into so as not to pressure her. When she appeared with a child and a brief comment about a complicated story with the father, I accepted it as a given. We're not taught to automatically suspect loved ones of the worst. I welcomed her move closer to us with joy. In my mind, it looked like this: my sister is returning to family, her son will have a normal environment, my children will have a living cousin. Jessica's financial difficulties fit into her familiar pattern. She often started from scratch, changed jobs, sometimes searched for her path for a long time. I didn't connect this with Michael's possible involvement. Now, having the correspondence and transfers in front of me, I could see how deeply he was involved in her life. Housing rent, school payments, discussions of everyday expenses. But then, I only saw separate surfaces: her rare complaints, his fatigue, and talks about additional side jobs. I remembered all those conversations with Michael about a difficult period, about the need to economize, how we postponed repairs, trips, major purchases, how I agreed because I understood, yes, expenses are growing, that's life. It didn't occur to me that a substantial part of his efforts was going towards supporting another household. The children's conversations emerged with particular clarity. Phrases about how Dad is somehow often around when Aunt Jessica is dealing with something were previously perceived as coincidence. When you have no reason to doubt your partner's basic honesty, the brain doesn't rush to combine such details into a pattern. I only saw this when I already had direct confirmation in hand. The psychologist later explained that this was a fairly typical story. A person doesn't notice not because they're incapable, but because their psyche protects them from destroying their familiar worldview until there's clear proof. Before the correspondence, I had scattered signals. After, they turned into a chain. I understood fairly quickly that a loud public scandal wouldn't make things easier for me. I didn't want to email details to friends or family, didn't want to turn this into a topic of discussion. The more people interfere in a personal story at a moment when you yourself haven't figured it out yet, the harder it is to maintain control over your life. I tried to protect the children from abrupt changes. We maintained our usual routine: school, activities, dinner, conversations about small things. They certainly felt that something was wrong, but I deliberately postponed a serious conversation until the moment when I could handle it myself without breaking down. It was important that my words come not from pain, but from some internal foundation. The practical part also required attention. I made an appointment with a lawyer to understand what options I had: divorce, division of property, alimony, schedule for time with the children. I perceived this not as war with Michael, but as formalizing the new reality in which we already found ourselves. The more clarity there was in legal matters, the less space remained for chaotic decisions. I didn't communicate with Jessica, not because I didn't have the desire to speak out, but because I understood right now any conversation with her would turn into a mixture of her justifications and my desire to hear what could no longer exist. A pause seemed like the only sensible option. This wasn't a final break, it was recognition. Right now, I'm not in a state to have either an honest or useful dialogue. In quiet evenings when the children fell asleep, I was sometimes overcome by a feeling of emptiness. But along with this came another thought. My life doesn't reduce only to the role of a wife who was cheated on. I have children, work, my own skills, my character, experience. The story with Michael and Jessica is a huge part of my reality, but not all of it entirely. At one of the first sessions, the psychologist formulated what became a foundation for me. Trusting loved ones is normal, not a mistake. Normal state of an adult. Lying for years is a choice of those who act that way. There's a boundary between these things, and my task is not to erase my ability to trust, but to build healthier boundaries around it. With this thought, I approached the moment that couldn't be avoided anyway, a conversation with my older child about the fact that a different chapter was beginning in our family. I postponed the conversation with my older child exactly until the moment when I was confident I could hold the line and not dump my emotions on him. One evening, it became clear I couldn't delay any longer. He was already old enough to feel the tension and draw his own conclusions, and leaving him alone with guesses seemed wrong. We sat in the kitchen after dinner when the younger one had already gone to her room. I didn't prepare a long speech. The only thing I decided in advance to speak in simple words and not look for beautiful formulations. I said that serious changes had occurred between Michael and me, and we would no longer live together as before. I didn't specify details. I said honestly, he made a choice that deeply hurt me, and now we need to arrange our life differently. The most expected question came quickly. Was it because of him? I almost physically felt how important it was now to answer not with general phrases, but in a way that he would really believe. I repeated several times that this was a story between adults, and his fault in this was zero. How we, the adults, deal with this is our responsibility. His task is to remain a child, not to judge us. Jessica's name wasn't in this conversation. I deliberately left that layer aside. It was already difficult enough for him to digest the very fact that his parents were separating, and building in the betrayal within the extended family as well seemed excessive to me. There are things he might learn later when he's older, but not now. He asked if he would see his father. I answered yes, and this wasn't a question of my sympathy or resentment. Michael remains his father, and their relationship shouldn't completely depend on how things turned out between him and me. At the same time, I outlined that there would be new rules, clear agreements, a transparent schedule, so there wouldn't be eternal waiting and disappointments. After the conversation, I felt not relief, but rather tired acceptance. One important step was taken, and it passed without shouting and accusations. This didn't cancel the pain,
but it helped not to turn what was happening into a chaos. I caught myself thinking that if anything in this story could be done differently, then at least how we behave with the children. With my younger daughter, everything was simpler and more complicated at the same time. Simpler because she understood less, more complicated because she felt more strongly through the mood of adults, not through words. I only told her that Dad would live in another place for now, but he still loves her and will meet with her. At this level, that was enough for her. The rest will come later when she has more questions. In parallel, I continued to deal with the practicalities. The lawyer helped outline the framework for divorce, division of property, alimony, schedule for time with the children. I didn't set the goal to take everything from Michael. I wanted decisions to be not only emotionally understandable, but also viable. We would still be connected through the children, and turning every meeting into a battlefield was a dubious prospect. The relationship with Jessica in my life at this stage looked like an empty space. I didn't block her, didn't wave statements around, simply didn't respond and didn't write myself. It was like a familiar room locked with a key. You know it's there, but right now you can't go in there so as not to stir up what you're barely holding inside. Sometimes I caught myself remembering the two of us as children. Shared games, secrets, teenage conversations. And in these moments, it was especially strange to realize that this very person turned out to be a participant in that part of my life that I'm the last to learn about. But even here, the emotions weren't only black and white. Along with the pain was also an understanding that over these years, we both changed significantly, and I continued for a long time to see in her only the image of younger sister, and not an adult person with her own weaknesses and choices. Psychotherapy gradually helped bring order into this internal mess. At one of the sessions, we discussed why not only the fact of infidelity bothered me so much, but also that it happened within the family. I formulated an important thing for myself. In my worldview, family was always something like the last circle of trust. The world can be unfair. People at work can let you down, but home and loved ones, that's the place where you can't lie on a large scale. And now, precisely that belief was breaking. Instead of convincing me to forgive and let go, or conversely, to fight to the end, the psychologist suggested focusing on more real tasks. Build boundaries without dissolving either in someone else's guilt or in my own pain. Not turn this story into my only identity. Leave myself the right to trust in the future, albeit with a more sober view. By the time the divorce documents were almost ready, inside there was no longer that initial shock. What remained was regret, about the loss of the former picture of family, about destroyed trust, about the fact that the children would never see their parents the way I once saw them. But along with this also came a quiet feeling that I'm not a victim stuck in one moment, but a person who is gradually moving forward, even if along an unplanned route. And precisely at this moment, the story stopped being only mine. It was time to look at everything through Michael's eyes, not to justify, but to understand how he himself reached this point.
My name is Michael. I'm 40 years old. If someone had told me a few years ago that I would end up in such a situation, I probably would have laughed and said that wasn't me. I always considered myself a more or less responsible person. I work, provide for my family, don't drink binges, don't disappear for weeks. Against the backdrop of other people's stories, my marriage with Sarah looked quite normal. When it all started, we were going through a difficult period. Sarah was pregnant with our second child, spent a lot of time lying, often felt unwell. I worked more than usual, trying to handle both home and bills and various plans. In the evening, I came home tired, and what awaited me wasn't rest and ease, but another shift. Ginner, the older one, household. It was hard for Sarah, and I understood that, but irritation was building up inside that I neither knew how to acknowledge nor properly discuss. Jessica was living nearby then, in our city. She often stopped by to help, sit with the older one, bring something, substitute for Sarah when she was completely exhausted. For me, at first, she was simply my wife's younger sister, a person who helps out. Gradually, everything shifted. With her, I could talk without the eternal topics about tests, doctors, baby colic, and bills. She listened, joked, could support, say that I carry a lot on my shoulders. At that moment, it sounded like a breath of air. Now, looking back, I understand that everything didn't start with some one night, but with many small internal concessions, with the fact that I allowed myself to get more and more emotionally close to a person I shouldn't have, with the fact that I complained to Jessica about fatigue and misunderstanding instead of talking about it properly with Sarah. Then it seemed to me that I was just looking for support. In reality, I was gradually transferring part of what I should solve in marriage to the side where I didn't need to take responsibility. At some point, the line was erased. This wasn't a pre-planned romance. There was one party that Sarah couldn't go to because of her pregnancy. Jessica went instead. We drank, laughed. That evening, I felt not as a husband and father who constantly owes someone something, but simply a man who was welcomed. At some point, this crossed that line, after which you can no longer say we were just talking. In the morning, I felt ashamed like I hadn't been in a long time. Jessica also looked confused. We both said the same thing. This is a mistake. It shouldn't have happened. I sincerely wanted to believe that this is where it all ended. Go home, pretend that this was a terrible but isolated episode that no one would ever know about. After some time, Jessica said she was planning to move to another state. She explained it by saying she was tired, that she wanted to start everything over, change the environment. At that moment, I perceived it as a chance to close the story. It was painful and shameful, but deep down, I thought she'll leave, we'll distance ourselves, everything will erase itself. The real reason came out later. She called and she said she was pregnant. At that moment, everything inside me broke. Sarah was pregnant with our second child. Jessica was leaving. I was simultaneously a husband who should support his wife and a man who turned out to be the father of another child that no one should know about. Jessica decided to leave not just randomly. This was her way to cut everything off and not destroy her sister's life. She didn't demand that I leave my family, didn't make scenes. She said she would manage on her own, that it would be better for everyone this way. In words, it sounded like the right decision. In reality, like an escape in which I willingly participated. I didn't find in myself either the courage to tell Sarah just then, nor the courage to honestly refuse to participate in the child's life. I chose a third option, to pretend that somehow I could live in between, officially continue to be a husband and father in one family, and simultaneously not let go of the thought about another one that I myself had driven far away. Jessica left. Saren continued her pregnancy. Our daughter was born. Outwardly, life returned to its usual track. Work, home, children. Only somewhere in another state, another child was growing, about whom no one in my house knew. At that moment, it seemed to me that distance would solve everything. Now I understand that it was precisely at this moment that I began building that double reality that sooner or later had to collapse.
When Jessica left, for some time, I really tried to live as if nothing had happened. Sarah gave birth to our daughter. The house was again filled with sleepless nights, diapers, chores. Outwardly, everything looked as it should have looked in a family with a small child. If someone had observed us from the outside, they would have seen an ordinary picture: a tired husband, a wife busy with children, rare evenings together. Inside, I had another life running in parallel. I knew that somewhere in another place, Jessica was going to the same pharmacies as Sarah, buying the same children's things, only alone. I tried not to think about it too often, because every time thoughts went there, a heavy feeling of guilt overwhelmed me. It was easier for me to keep this topic in the fog, tell myself that it was even better for everyone this way than to destroy everything. For some time, we hardly communicated. Jessica wrote rarely, briefly, mostly about business, about pregnancy, then about the child, about everyday difficulties. I answered formally, tried to keep distance. I wanted to believe that this way we could carefully part ways. But the older her son became, the stronger I felt that just sitting it out wouldn't work. The first serious turning point happened when she wrote that it was very hard for her to pull everything alone. There were no dramatic phrases, just a level description: work, daycare, bills, fatigue. Against this backdrop, my complaint about long shifts and credit suddenly seemed to me like a privilege. I still wasn't alone. Sarah, children, even if tired, but family. She had no one except the child. I started sending money. At first, a little, under the pretext of just want to help. Then the amounts became regular. I explained it this way: I'm obligated to participate, at least financially. This is my child too. To Sarah, I talked about overtime, difficulties at work, the need to pull additional tasks. Somewhere at this moment, a stable scenario appeared. She heard one version of what was happening, Jessica another, and reality was somewhere in between. Over time, financial help alone started to seem insufficient to me. I asked to send photos of my son. Then we started video calling. At first, rarely, then more often. He was growing, changing, and along with this grew the feeling that I was essentially watching my own life from the side. In one house, I was a full-fledged father. In another, a person on a phone screen. I began to think more and more often that this couldn't continue long, but any thoughts about telling Sarah broke against her face before my eyes. Tired, with a child in her arms, with endless tasks, I didn't see a scenario in which my honest conversation wouldn't destroy everything. And honestly, I feared that destruction more than the feeling of guilt about Jessica and her son's life. Correspondence with her gradually stopped being only about the child. We remembered old times, shared how the day went, discussed things that I stopped discussing with Sarah, simply because at home someone always demanded attention: children, chores, household questions. With Jessica, these conversations took place in the silence of her apartment and my car in the parking lot. There, I didn't have to choose between dishes and openness. At some point, I suggested she think about moving closer. Formally, the argument was understandable. Family nearby, it would be easier with the child, more support. Deep down, there was also another motivation. It was unbearable for me to remain a father at a distance. I convinced myself that I was doing this for my son. He deserves to have not only an image of dad on the screen, but also a living presence. Jessica resisted for a long time. She said it was a bad idea, that we would only complicate everything more. She reminded me that I had a family, that her moving closer to us would make the lie denser and more painful. I was persistent. I said it wasn't for us, but for the child, that he wasn't guilty of what decisions we once made. Partially, I believed this. Partially, I just didn't want to let go of either of my lives. In the end, she agreed. I helped with finding an apartment, with the move, with enrolling her son in daycare or school. This required money and time. Sarah heard from me about more difficult projects, business trips, and overtime. Jessica about, I'll try to do everything so as not to hurt anyone. In fact, I was creating conditions in which deceit became not a temporary measure, but a permanent way of life. When Jessica moved back to our city, everything looked quite decent outwardly. Officially, Sarah's younger sister returned closer to family after a difficult period. She's raising a child alone. She has a complicated story with the father. But now there are loved ones nearby who will help. Everything fit into this picture: her fatigue, my willingness to support, and even my regular trips on business. Only no one except the two of us knew that the return was the result of a long chain of decisions in which there was still no honest conversation with Sarah. Instead of it, there was the hope that if everything was done carefully, not hurting anyone right now, somehow it would work itself out. Now, this sounds naive, but at that moment, this thought seemed logical enough for me to continue.
When Jessica was already living in our city, my life finally split into two lines. On one side, home with Sarah and the children, familiar morning routines, school chats, weekends we tried to spend together. On the other, Jessica's apartment, her son, to whom I gradually became attached not only as an obligation, but as a living child who considered me an important person. From the outside, much looked quite explainable. Sarah saw that it was hard for her sister alone. New city, child, rented housing. The fact that I was helping, with rides, advice, sometimes money, fit into the image of a relative who didn't turn away. If Jessica and I weren't connected by past history, this perhaps really would be something worthy. But we had another layer behind us that Sarah didn't know about. The financial burden grew. Jessica's rent, her everyday expenses, her son's school, small unforeseen costs, all of this I pulled parallel to our joint bills with Sarah. I had to take on more work, agree to extra shifts, side jobs. For her, it looked like he's trying for the family. For me, like endless running between two lives in which the same person accepts me as support, not knowing about the other side. I often caught myself living on a schedule where everything was timed to the minute, when I could stop by Jessica's on the way, how to explain a delay at home, how to distribute money so that no one had extra questions. It was like constant calculation in which there was no room for spontaneity or rest. Paradoxically, but precisely in such fatigue, I still clung to the thought that I was doing right, not abandoning either side. Relations with Sarah at this time were outwardly stable, but less alive. We were both tired. She dealt with children, work, home. I with work, home, and what I kept silent about. Conversations became shorter, revolved more around practicalities than feelings. Somewhere deep down, I understood that part of my emotional energy I had long been taking outside our marriage, to where they don't ask direct questions, and where I could hide from responsibility under the guise of, I'm just helping. With Jessica, after her return, we tried to maintain a format that would look decent from the outside. Meetings supposedly for business, help with repairs, take to the doctor, pick up the child. But inevitably, between these tasks, there were also conversations and moments when the past reminded itself. We both knew this connection would never become clean again, and at the same time, both pretended that the main thing here was the child. The longer all this continued, the stronger the internal tension became. Any little thing could work as a trigger. If Sarah asked why I suddenly became more nervous or distracted, I blamed everything on work. If Jessica asked an uncomfortable question about how long this could still continue, I answered evasively, promising that someday everything will become clear. In reality, I was stalling for time. I wanted no one to be hurt sharply and immediately. I was afraid of Sarah's pain, afraid of judgment from family, afraid of losing the children, at the same time afraid of losing connection with Jessica's son and responsibility for decisions that had already been made. In the end, I made a choice not to change anything. This is also a choice, only much less honest. When Sarah learned the truth, it wasn't a sudden blow from nowhere for me, rather a feeling that what you had feared for many years had finally happened. In some painful sense, it even became easier. I no longer needed to keep so many versions of the same reality in my head, didn't need to remember who I said what to. Instead, another heaviness appeared, the awareness of the scale of consequences. Sarah asked me to move out, and it was absolutely logical. I packed my things and moved to a small apartment. For the first time in many years, I didn't have either of the lives I was used to nearby. I wasn't living with Sarah and the children. I wasn't living with Jessica and her son. I was living alone, in silence in which there was no more excuses. Precisely in this silence, it became especially clear that no complex set of circumstances cancels the simple fact everything that happened was held together by my agreement to continue. Relations with Sarah's children became different. Meetings on schedule, weekends agreed in advance, conversations in which you can feel they're keeping distance. And this isn't about revenge, but about a natural reaction to the loss of the former stable figure. Relations with Jessica also stopped being what I once imagined. Without the curtain of secrecy, it turned out that we were connected not by a romantic story, but by a chain of decisions in which there was much cowardice and little honesty. Now, looking back, I'm not looking for excuses for myself. There's only understanding that truth still finds its way out, no matter how careful the deception seems. And if before it seemed to me that I was balancing for everyone's sake, now it's clear I was balancing primarily for myself, shifting the cost of my decisions onto others.
My name is Jessica. I'm 32 years old. To be honest, I still can't always say out loud, without pause, what I got myself into. It's easier to say it just happened. Life worked out that way. But the more time passes, the clearer it becomes that behind every accidentally stood quite specific decisions. When Sarah married Michael, I was sincerely happy for her. He seemed like that very reliable person, usually shown in movies. Stable job, calm character, ability to take responsibility. I was searching for a lot of things in life then, jumping from one job to another. My personal life wasn't working out either. Against the backdrop of their family, I felt like an eternally lagging younger sister. The first years after their wedding, I often visited them, helped with my nephew, sat with Sarah when she was tired, chatted with both her and Michael. It was easy to communicate with him. He treated me not as an attached relative, but as a separate person. He listened, advised, sometimes joked. Then it seemed like just normal, warm family relations. When Sarah became pregnant with the second child, everything became more tense. She often felt unwell, spent a lot of time lying down. Michael, on the contrary, worked more and more. At some point, I started coming to them almost on a schedule. Help with the child, bring something, substitute for Sarah. I felt needed. This feeling has always been dangerous for me. On it, I easily begin to build excessive expectations. Gradually, the boundaries began to shift. Michael and I talked more alone, either in the kitchen while Sarah rests or on the way to the store. He shared how tired he was, how hard it was to pull everything. I, instead of returning the conversation to safe ground, perceived this as trust. It was pleasant for me that he was opening up specifically to me. This isn't an excuse, but an important part of how everything looked from the inside for me. The point of no return happened not sharply. There was no pre-planned moment. There was a party where Sarah couldn't go. Michael suggested I go instead of her so as not to leave him alone among colleagues. I agreed. It seemed there was nothing criminal in this. We're family, after all. There was music, alcohol, easy atmosphere. We danced, joked, and that invisible boundary that was previously maintained simply disappeared at some point. I remember the morning after that night in fragments. Shame, fear, a feeling that I simultaneously betrayed my sister and myself. Michael said it was a mistake, that this couldn't continue, that this shouldn't happen again. I nodded, understood he was right, and at the same time, inside, something else had already happened. Too quickly, I began to cling to that side of him I saw, not as my sister's husband, but as a man who looks at me not only as a relative. After some time, I learned I was pregnant. This wasn't joyful news, rather an ice-cold shower. Sarah is expecting a second child. They have a family, home, plans, and I, her younger sister, who unexpectedly is carrying a child from her husband. I walked around with this in my head for a long time, not daring to talk to anyone. At first, I wanted to pretend there would be a reasonable way out. Maybe it's not that term. Maybe it's a mistake altogether. But tests and doctors left no space for denial. The decision to leave for another state wasn't born immediately, but became the only one I saw then. To stay and give birth near Sarah would mean looking her in the eyes every day, hiding what would sooner or later manifest anyway. I couldn't tell her the truth then. There wasn't enough courage or honesty. Destroying her life with my confession seemed monstrous. And yes, there was also an element of justifying myself. If I leave, it will be easier for everyone. I told the family I wanted to change the environment, that I found work in another state, that this was a chance to start everything from scratch. No one knew about the pregnancy except Michael. I also didn't give him much choice. I said I was leaving and didn't expect either promises or drastic steps. It sounded proud, but behind it was ordinary fear. Fear of hearing that he would stay with his family anyway, and I would remain alone not only factually, but also formally. When I left, a period began that I now remember as frozen. Pregnancy, strange city, rented room, work that I quit after a couple of months because it was physically hard. I practically cut myself off from my former life. I wrote to Sarah rarely, excusing myself with busyness and adaptation. She, of course, worried, but didn't push. At some point, I told her I had a child, without going into details, said the father wasn't involved. Formally, this wasn't far from the truth. Michael's presence then was very conditional. He still wrote, at first rarely, evenly, to ask about health, about the child, to offer help. I kept distance but did not cut the connection. I wanted simultaneously both to punish myself with loneliness and not to feel completely abandoned. At some point, he started helping with money. I tried to say I would manage, but in reality, without his help, it would have been even harder. My son was growing, and I increasingly understood that the story from which I supposedly ran away hadn't gone anywhere. I just transferred it to another place. And when Michael started talking about how it would be better if we lived closer to family, I at first perceived this as another attempt to complicate an already complicated construction. But the longer I lived in a strange city without support, the more often I caught myself thinking that returning wasn't only about him, but about me too, about fatigue from constant struggle alone. At that moment, I still didn't realize that with this return, I wouldn't just return to family, but would transfer our secret almost to the doorstep of my own home.
When Michael once again suggested thinking about returning, I was no longer in a state to easily brush it off. In several years in another state, I had managed to understand that starting from scratch is a beautiful expression behind which stands very concrete fatigue. A child, rented housing, work where you hold on primarily for stable income rather than for a dream, and almost complete absence of people you can lean on. In conversations, he emphasized our son, said he needs not only a screen but also a living father, that there's family nearby who could help me, even with some everyday things, that Sarah shouldn't suffer because of our decisions, but the child also shouldn't live as if he doesn't have the other side. There was a lot of logic in these words. The problem was that behind this logic stood the same people who once decided to hide everything. I waited for a long time. Staying there meant continuing to pull everything alone, without a chance for a break. Returning meant being near Sarah again, near the family I had already managed to betray before. Inside was a strange mixture: shame, fear, hope, fatigue. At some point, fatigue outweighed. I agreed. The practical part took time. Finding an apartment closer to them, processing documents, packing things. Michael helped, consulted about neighborhoods, transferred money for deposit, advised on school choice. From an official point of view, everything looked decent. A man helps his wife's younger sister with moving. No one except the two of us knew that he was helping not only a sister, but also his child. When I came back, the strangest thing was feeling that outwardly everything was perceived as a joyful event. Mom, Sarah, relatives, everyone was genuinely happy. Finally, you're closer. Now you won't be alone. The child will be with family. I smiled, nodded, thanked, and at the same time, inside, there was always a feeling that I was standing on thin ice. Every phrase, every joint dinner, every family gathering reminded me that I was physically among people I couldn't fully look in the eyes. Sarah and I tried to communicate as before. She was sincerely interested in my life, asked about my son, offered help. Her warmth was both support and a blow at the same time. Support because I really needed my sister. A blow because her trust constantly reminded me what exactly I was risking. Michael and I outwardly kept distance. We tried to frame any of our interactions through understandable reasons. He stops by to help, bring something, advise. For everyone around, he looked like a good relative who didn't abandon the single mother. For me, he was a person with whom I had too long a line of unresolved things behind us. My son fairly quickly accepted him into his life. For him, Michael became something between a close adult and the one who will always help. I told him this was our relative, that he could count on him. The honest name of their connection I couldn't pronounce. Every time Michael played with him, took him for a walk, or helped with homework, a mixed feeling rose in me. Joy for my son and anxiety about what construction all this was held on. Over time, everyday life pulled me in. I got used to the routes between my home, school, Mom's, Sarah's house. Outwardly, my life became more stable. There were people nearby who could sit with the child, help on a difficult day, just talk. If you abstract from how it all started, the picture turned out almost right. But precisely this almost didn't let me relax. Sometimes I caught Michael's gaze on me at the family table and understood that he too was living in this double reality. On one side, Sarah's husband, father of their children. On the other, a person who knows that nearby sits a child to whom he's also a father, but not in the status in which it would be logical for them to be. And we both, each time, pretended that nothing special was happening. I asked myself many times, why didn't you stop earlier? The honest answer sounded like this: because each time it seemed that this particular decision was the softest of all possible. Leave so as not to destroy her life, not tell so as not to finish her off, return so it would be easier for the child, agree to such a form of Michael's participation so the son wouldn't grow up completely without him. At each stage, there was an explanation in which I looked not like a hero, but also not like the main villain. But in sum, all these half-hearted decisions added up to a story where far more people suffered than if the truth had been told earlier. The day when everything came out wasn't thunder from a clear sky. rather a feeling that the door we had been propping from inside for many years finally stopped holding. Sarah called and asked me to come. In her voice, there was no hysteria, but there was that heightened calm that usually appears when a person has already understood something. I knew this wouldn't be an ordinary visit. When I entered her home and saw her gaze, it became clear that the moment from which I had been running all these years had caught up. And ahead was not so much retribution for the very fact of the connection, but for all the years of silence and attempts to get by without an honest conversation.
When looking at this story from the outside, the first desire is to find one main culprit and simplify the picture. But if you examine the behavior of each participant more carefully, it becomes clear that here met not monsters and victims, but ordinary people with their own psychological features, avoidances, and immaturity. Sarah. Sarah lived for a long time with the feeling that she had a normal family. Her key features: tendency to take on household and responsibility while putting her own feelings and doubts for later. High level of trust in loved ones. She wasn't used to building paranoia and looking for betrayal behind every coincidence. Habit of explaining oddities with logical versions. Fatigue, work, difficult times, sister's move. From a psychological point of view, this isn't stupidity, but a defense mechanism. When a person isn't ready for destruction of the basic worldview, the psyche helps them not to fold scattered signals into one painful pattern. Sarah wasn't blind, she simply chose that level of truth with which she could live until direct facts appeared. Michael. Michael lived for many years in a mode of postponing honest choice. In him are clearly visible fear of conflict and destruction. He's afraid to tell Sarah, afraid of losing the children, afraid of looking like a bad person. Desire to preserve everything at once, both marriage and connection with Jessica, and participation in another child's life. Tendency to self-deceit through soft decisions, leave instead of confessing, return for the child's sake, although she understood this would complicate everything. From a behavioral point of view, this is a classic example of emotional avoidance. Instead of one honest step, but painful, a person chooses many small, convenient decisions, each of which slightly worsens the situation. In his story, the key wasn't romance as passion, but inability to recognize consequences in time and take them upon himself. Jessica. Jessica found herself between the role of younger sister and a woman who wants to be needed. In her manifested feeling of secondariness against the backdrop of Sarah's settled life, she long perceived herself as less successful. Need for recognition and significance. Michael's attention, his trust, and words of support quickly became an emotional anchor for her. Tendency to self-deceit through soft decisions, leave instead of confessing, return for the child's sake, although she understood this would complicate everything. From a psychological point of view, her choices are not only about morality, but also about an immature attempt at simultaneously preserve love and not face her guilt directly. Instead of one honest no or honest yes, she lived for years in an intermediate zone where everything was held on hope that somehow it will work itself out. Overall dynamic. In this story, several typical mechanisms converged. Avoiding direct conversations. None of the three decided in time to speak the truth to the end. Michael to Sarah, Jessica to her sister, Sarah to herself about suspicions. Hope for a soft solution. Instead of taking one honest step and living through its consequences, all participants at some point chose the path of not now, stretching pain over years. Illusion of protecting others at the cost of lies. Michael convinced himself he was silent to not hurt Sarah. Jessica that she was leaving to not destroy her life, although in fact both were shifting responsibility forward in time. From a professional analysis point of view, there's no unique pathology here. This is a very human story about how fear, guilt, and desire to preserve comfort lead to a long double life that sooner or later ends in revelation. Such situations don't appear suddenly. They're almost always preceded by years of accumulated unspoken things, uncomfortable compromises, and ignoring warning signals. It's impossible to completely insure yourself, but you can significantly reduce the risk and cope better if it has already happened. If you're in Sarah's place, the one who was betrayed, don't take all the blame on yourself. The fact that you trusted and didn't look for betrayal in every gesture doesn't make you guilty of the fact that another person lied for years. Responsibility for deception lies with the one who committed it. Don't make decisions in the first emotional blow. Divorce, break with relatives, moving, all this is better formalized after at least minimal stabilization. Support from a psychologist or neutral specialist helps separate emotions from practical steps. Maintain boundaries and dignity. This means not staging public spectacles that will later hit you and the children, clearly stating what you're no longer willing to accept, lies, double life, and what you're ready for the sake of children. Contact with the other parent according to clear rules. If you're in Michael's role, double life, honestly admit that living between is also a choice. Expectation that the situation will somehow resolve itself almost never works. The longer the double life continues, the more people ultimately get trauma. Don't hide behind children and care. Phrases, "I'm doing it for the children," are often used to justify one's own avoidance of conflict. For a child, what's more traumatic is not the fact of parents' separation itself, but many years of lies and instability. If there's already a parallel connection, stop the double game. The choice is always unpleasant, but it's necessary. Either honestly end the relationship on the side or honestly complete the main union, and don't delay with clarity. Any third option is the same postponement of pain for later. If you're in Jessica's role, relationship with an occupied person, don't enter a story where you're initially a stranger in someone else's family. A connection with a partner who is already married is almost always built on hopes and promises, not on real readiness to change life. The price usually turns out to be much higher than it seems at the beginning. Work with the feeling of your own worth. The stronger the internal feeling of "I'm worse" or secondary, the easier it is to agree to the role of secret part of someone's life. This isn't about morality as such, but about your own self-esteem and ability to build relationships where you're not in a backup position. Don't use the child as justification for further secrecy. The phrase, "let at least the child see the father and therefore I agree to everything," often means that adults continue an uncomfortable scenario, covering their inability to put an end with children's names. General principles to avoid reaching such a point. Regularly talk about the uncomfortable: fatigue, feeling of loneliness in a couple, sexual dissatisfaction, feeling of being undervalued. All this is better discussed early before a third party appears and temptation to find support outside the relationship forms. Don't ignore internal signals. If something causes persistent discomfort, strange coincidences, constant business trips, secretiveness with money, it's important not only to explain it to yourself, but also to bring it into conversation, not in a format of "you're guilty," but in format of "I'm anxious, let's clarify." Learn to honestly end relationships, not smear them out. Sometimes an honest break or pause is a less destructive option than a prolonged life on two fronts. This requires courage and readiness to face someone else's pain, but in perspective leaves fewer fragments. Involve specialists in time. Family therapy, individual therapy, marriage counseling. This isn't for the weak, but for those who want to understand themselves, not live on autopilot until the next crisis. This story could have gone differently if one of the three at some point had chosen an uncomfortable but honest step to admit that the boundary had already been crossed and not try to preserve everything at once. But even in the form in which it developed, everyone has one important opportunity not to repeat this scenario further and not transfer it as a norm to the next relationships.